I saw recently a study that said that there are no natural disasters in Cleveland, which made it the safest place in the country to live. No hurricanes, no earthquakes. But we had a tsunami, and our tsunami was the mortgage foreclosure crisis. It destabilized Cleveland neighborhoods. It took our population from over 500,000 to about 380,000 people in a 10-year period. The only city that had a greater population loss percentage-wise during that period of time was Detroit. More importantly, it wiped income, wealth, out of hundreds of thousands of people's pockets. Typically, your greatest source of wealth in this country, statistically, we know that, is the equity in your home. We took home equity values and we literally erased it almost entirely in many communities in Cleveland. So we created this chaotic picture of foreclosures. There were vacancies, properties on the east side of Cleveland when they were foreclosed the first time. We did a study once when I was county treasurer that showed they virtually never paid property taxes again. You couldn't have asked for a more difficult, more problematic situation. And the impact is one that we will feel for generations.
Owning home for me meant security. It meant success. It meant reaching some goals that both my husband and I had set out to accomplish, and the opportunity to leave some form of financial wealth to my children.
Like most Americans, homeownership as you're a young person is always one of your first goals. Sort of the American dream, as it's always been termed.
Whether it's first or second, having a good family, they're all important. But when you think about what makes up that American dream, homeownership certainly ranks high on the list.
When you see homeowners in a community, they have a much stronger stake. You see homeowners in a community, they're more vested, not just in the home that they're in, but they're vested in the community. Whether it's church, shopping, or play, they see that as an important part of them being in that community.
I'm the son of Greek immigrants, and I really never felt that I would have owned it in America until I could say that I owned my own house.
Owning a home means to me everything. It's everything in life that you work for. It gives you a place to be, it gives you meaning, it gives you responsibility, it gives you a stable foundation in life. I spent some time where I didn't have a home, and it was hard. When I was young, I lived in Los Angeles, and I was living in my car. I would catch the bus to my job, and I would go through Skid Row every day, get to work, and I would go and work with rappers and different entertainers doing artwork. And I would leave seeing the money and come all the way through seeing Skid Row and then not have a home myself. It kind of really humbled me and made me realize that one day when I have a home, I'm gonna really be responsible and take care of it.
I met my wife, and at the time, I was living in Lakewood. I had a big old double with my sister and brother-in-law, and I was looking, for what reason I don't know, but I was looking for myself to buy a contemporary in Westlake. And my wife was also living in Lakewood, but her sister was in the real estate business here, and said that this house was available, and a realtor had owned it, and it was a great spot, and it was great everything. And I thought, well, okay, I'll take a look at it. And I don't know how she wedged herself into the transaction, but the next thing I know, I'm living in Pepper Pike with the lady who then became my wife soon after. So we moved in, and if you go across 91 over here, you see Daisy Hill, and you see all the estates and mansions and stuff, and I thought, maybe this house will just be a stepping stone. Maybe we'll just be here for a little while and then go across the street and get one of the jumbos. And it didn't quite work out that way.
The problem is, in this country, we look at homes as an investment, and we should be looking at it as shelter. You know, it's a place to raise a family, it's a place to be safe, and the whole system has been designed for real estate to be an investment.
Foreclosures were rare. When they did happen on a street of 40 homes, there might be one foreclosure in 10 years. And the bank would say, well, okay, what do? We're going to foreclose. We'll take the property back, we will sell it, and we're probably going to get our money back. We're probably going to be covered by that.
You hear all these people who bought a home in Levittown for $12,000 and sold it for $100,000 sometime later in their life. Well, yeah, that sounds good. And maybe all they really did was keep pace with inflation. Did their purchasing power really increase? I don't know. Now, keeping your purchasing power in place, that's worth something. But to me, an investment should pay interest or dividends.
Up until probably 1995, almost all the mortgages in this country were issued by local lending institutions, and that money, those commitments were kept local. However, there was a financial innovation called securitization, developed at least in part by a guy named Louis Ranieri, that took mortgages out of local banks and local institutions and packaged them and put them together in the form of bonds and sold them to investors. And at the time this was done, it was viewed as a brilliant financial innovation, and it was a brilliant innovation. It freed up capital locally. And what can be safer than an American mortgage?
Prior to the crash, mortgage brokers were salesmen, and what they would do is they would form partnerships with lenders. They would go out and find the borrowers, they would put together the mortgage application, they would submit it to a lender. The lender would underwrite it, they would approve it, they would fund the loan, and the mortgage broker would be paid a commission for that loan.
This is what caused mortgages to go from being issued and kept locally to being perhaps created locally but then sold to international markets. But that's when we got sloppy. When we took risk away from people to local level, we incentivized people to make these mortgages, that's when things got out of hand.
Going into the mid-2000s, you heard a lot of things coming out of different markets like Las Vegas and Florida and California, where you had just incredible stories of condo developments being built, and before the units are done, they've already been sold 3 or 4 times, and each investor is making 40, 50 grand off of it, and by the time it's finished, it's been sold 4 times to the person that actually moves in. Those markets were obviously unsustainable, but we never really thought that would affect us.
People were forming title companies who never were in the business because it was easy money. All this paper flowing around, and all we have to do is collect our fees.
On my loan, there was a fee called other fee. Other fee. It didn't even say it just was called other fee. And there was an amount next to it.
In many cases, the origination of the loan and the making of a loan to a borrower is less profitable than the buying and selling of loans on the secondary market. And again, particularly in the time leading up to the crash, these loans were being bought and sold at a frenzied pace. Lenders were making more money from that than they were from the origination of the loans themselves.
People referred to this as the secondary market, meaning the bank made the loan, and then within weeks or a month, the bank sold the loan to some entity that's in the business of holding large numbers of loans. The theory behind that was a good one. If banks could get that money back within a month or 2, they'd have that money and they could reloan it again.
Where the system broke down, at least in my opinion, was when the buying and selling of the loans became more important to the business model than the making of the loans themselves. And when they started cutting corners and trying to keep the machine moving and keep the profits going by selling these loans off and not necessarily documenting the sale properly, that's when all of the problems started to arise.
One day I got a phone call from a bank that said, hey, we've got several properties nationwide we'd like to to give you. And I thought, well, that's too good to be true. But one of them was in Camden, New Jersey, and I had my eye on that, so I got back with them and said, hey, I want the others. I don't know what I could possibly do with those, but I'll take the one in Camden. And they said, no deal, but how about if we pay you $500 and you take all 60 homes nationwide? So I bid. I'm like, okay, you know what? I'll figure out what to do with them later, and I'll get the one that I want, and we'll just sort of sort this out. And that became a monthly occurrence. And 60 turned into 100, and as the different executives would leave the banks and go to other banks, suddenly we're dealing with the nation's largest lenders, literally with a cell phone and an AOL account.
It feeds on itself. Well, then what happens? Well, we got to feed this giant machine. Okay, maybe now we got to start lowering our criteria. You get it, the liar's loans and the 0% down and all the other stuff that happened.
At that time, I could have gotten a loan by saying I make $1 million, which I don't. I could have gotten a loan without showing my tax returns. I could have gotten a loan without even showing my pay stubs.
I've seen cases, personally seen cases that were brought to my attention where documents were erased and the amount of the monthly income that somebody made was changed.
Now, what kind of nonsense is that? You know, I mean, it's nice to have an ease of borrowing and, you know, you want it to be a little easier, but that's just insanity.
Yeah, that's fraud. That's definitely, that would be criminal fraud, and people have gone to prison for this. People have gone to prison for it here in Cleveland.
Did you have at that time any inkling that this was going to go south?
None at all. None at all. It just seemed like it would, continue forever. And when you see, what used to be, say, 10 Cleveland, Ohio properties come in a month, go to 1,000, that is when I thought, well, something is wrong. How could this have happened? That's shocking.
It doesn't matter as long as housing goes up. I buy a house, I lose my job, big deal. I sell the house at a profit because the value went up. Well, it doesn't work that way. Everything comes tumbling down as soon as those prices decline.
As the market really got crazy over those years, again, number one, everyone realized, hey, there's a lot of money to be made here. And then number two, everyone realized that really we can make our own rules. And it became a race to the bottom.
The first bank I worked for was National City. Literally, they made $2 billion in profit one year in the early aughts. And $1 billion of that was from the mortgage business. And that's can create its own problems. You think you're smarter than everybody else, and you start to do things a little bit out of the ordinary and think you can get away with it because we're smart enough to do this.
And it also completely disregards the functioning of the mortgage market, where as these loans are bought and sold, they may take 1,000 loans and pool them together into one security, and then they may dice that security up into 100 parts and sell off certificates to 100 different investors.
Greed didn't stop at Wall Street. It started at Wall Street and went all the way down to the person who watched the infomercial at night and thought he or she were going to get a big bargain because they could buy a piece of garbage for $5,000, only to give it up again because they couldn't handle it. So it's tough business rehabbing homes.
And so when these mortgage brokers set up shop in a situation that was very similar to a traditional bank, the expectation that those borrowers had is that particularly those that weren't MBAs or accountants, is that if a bank, and they still thought of it as a bank, if a mortgage broker, if that person behind the big oak desk was willing to loan the money, it must make sense for them, because why would they loan me money I couldn't afford to repay? That was so beyond anybody's experience.
My foster parents came up from the South. They could not read above a 5th or 6th grade level. They bought their home because their banker was honest.
I'm a free market guy. But the problem is, the free market is really for the real economy. It's for mining, it's for farming, it's for manufacturing, it's for retail. That's where competition is a good thing. Now, banking is different. That's where you need to have regulation. It was working fine. Glass-Steagall was fine. In 1933, it fixed a lot of ills. It worked until 1999. And then all of a sudden we get Congress voting 99-0 to deregulate.
Why did that happen?
The banks wanted it. And when you deregulate that and let the investment bankers have access to the banking system, it's like letting the fox in the henhouse. It's the old thing, and it's OPM, other people's money.
My first epiphany moment on this is when I had the lobbyists for Key Bank and at the time National City Bank and Fifth Third in my office, and I was the ranking Democrat on the committee that was hearing this bill to essentially preempt Cleveland's predatory lending law. And I said, I'm so glad you guys are here because look, we're going to drive the business, the borrowing business for mortgage loans back to brick and mortar banks where, my God, you know, at Fifth Third or at National City Bank, you're never going to put your customers who you rely on for income from checking and savings and who've been your customers for 30 years and where you value your reputation, you're never going to put them in these kind of loans. And literally, almost all at the same time, oh, no, we're in favor of gutting Cleveland's predatory lending law. I'm like, well, how could that be? Well, I later learned that all of those banks had subsidiaries or relationships with the same kind of predatory loans that the kind of the most recognizable culprits, Washington Mutual and Long Beach Mortgage and Argent Mortgage and Countrywide and AmeriQuest, they were doing the same thing.
Speculation had become wild. It was like trafficking in junk bonds, except it was properties, vacant and abandoned properties. Remember, these properties had been financed through banks. Banks had sold the paper to Fannie Mae or HUD. That paper was then converted into Wall Street paper and made their way into our IRAs and retirement accounts and things like that.
And the ultimate buyer of all this paper was the federal government. The federal government was an enabler of this housing crisis.
To a certain extent, Fannie and Freddie always had this advantage in that they had the implicit guarantee of the government standing behind them, and yet they did operate just like any other for-profit corporation. They were trying to make a profit for their shareholders, and they were profit-driven.
So when the proverbial poop hit the fan, all of these entities and banks and Fannie Mae, they ended up acquiring all these properties because they guaranteed the loans, or they had foreclosed on many of them. So what they were doing is they were getting these vacant and abandoned properties, and for maybe a couple of $100, literally, and they would wholesale them to essentially a distributor for $1,000. So they'd make a little bit of money there. That distributor would then sell 200 here, 300 there to a retailer for $2,000. So everybody's doubling their money along the way in clumps of large batches of vacant and abandoned properties, and ultimately it would make its way to the person who watches the infomercial at night and thinks he's going to become rich because he can buy a house for $5,000 or $10,000, and really it's a pile of junk. It's delinquent. It has code violations, in many cases condemned, and pretty much what would end up happening in those circumstances, that property would then fall back into the cycle of decay and tax foreclosure, and it would just continue to go on and on and on.
It was great. It was all about the money. It was all about the money. People were getting insanely rich all the way up and down the line, except for the bondholders and the homeowners.
The first time I was brought to my attention was in the Slavic Village neighborhood of Cleveland. The councilman, Tony Brancatelli, started getting wind of transactions that people were sort of gaming the system.
Had we known, hey, we're buying a house without a roof or a complete burnout that's a hazard, obviously we wouldn't have done it, but it was part of the deal. You know, you had to take what was in this package as a whole.
The bondholders were deceived as well, and quite consciously, I might add. the reviews that were done of the pools of loans, even by the bond rating agencies that rated many of these securities AAA, making them available to big institutions like the state of Ohio's pension funds, which I got involved with when I was Attorney General, or people's 401ks and other kinds of mutual funds bought a lot of these securities because of their AAA rating. They would only look at like 1% of the files. So there was no due diligence done by the investment bank, by the bond rating agency, and the securities that resulted from that were full of loans that were designed to fail. If anybody with any financial sophistication spent a minute looking at them. Okay? And as a consequence, people's home values were artificially rising up, to the point that didn't make any sense. And there were serious economists and folks at the Federal Reserve and the leaders of the free world who were saying, well, we don't think U.S. real estate prices are ever going to go down. They're going to continue to go up. They may not go up by as much as they're going up right now, but they're going to always go up. And that was the operating presumption of everybody up and down the line.
By and large, that's true in the long run. But, as John Maynard Keynes said, in the long run, we're dead. You get caught up in it. It's a herd mentality. It's hard to resist it. Isaac Newton, the smartest guy in the world, allegedly, got caught in the South Sea Island bubble.
Well, I think like anything else, there was a growing pressure to make money and to increase short-term profits. And certainly that's what that did. So the city councilmen in Cleveland and some of the more foresighted elected officials were already starting to see that this was becoming a major problem for individual homeowners in the city, and that these loans that were being originated didn't make any sense, and people were signing them and not understanding what they were getting into, and ultimately that was resulting in them losing their homes and in the beginning of the glut of abandoned homes in the city.
And I learned that in that year, 2000, when they came to see me, the foreclosure rate by banks was double the normal rate. We were seeing about 3,000 to 3,500 a year in the entire county of Cuyahoga County, over 1.2 million people. That year we were over 7,000, and we led the country.
I have a neighborhood full of people who are used to paying their mortgage and used to doing what is right, and somebody else gets a loan, moves in, and doesn't pay anything, and now they suffer the consequences.
So when did you notice that there was going to be a problem for you?
A sheriff's deputy basically knocked on my door at Christmas time with his gun drawn and said, I said, hey, what's going on? He says, are you Blaine Murphy? And I said, well, yeah. And he had a picture of me on his clipboard, and I thought I was being held up. Quite frankly, I didn't know what was going on. And he said, well, you're a fugitive from justice from Ohio. And I said, I've never been to Ohio. How could that possibly be? And there was mutual confusion. The gun went away. I invited him in for coffee. We sat down. He started making phone calls, and then the gun came back out. And he goes, you got some trouble up in Ohio, and I have to take you in. You'll probably be out by the end of the day. Needless to say, I didn't see my home for nearly 4 years after that morning. I mean, I was taken away, and that was it.
The effect on Cleveland was a great deal of vacancy and abandonment, people walking away from their homes, banks foreclosing, banks taking title to properties that, again, were upside down, and hence banks didn't have much interest in foreclosing on them or trying to stabilize them, because they're not in the business of stabilizing homes. And so whole neighborhoods became decimated with vacancy, abandonment. And what comes with vacancy, abandonment is, of course, all the social ills, crime, drugs, arson, etc., etc.
Ironically, I was teaching a class on the mortgage foreclosure prevention crisis at my alma mater at Oberlin College. And I remember we began that semester, and I was going to come in and talk about mortgages and securitization, but literally every week during the teaching of this class, a catastrophe had occurred. Lehman Brothers closed, AIG was taken over, Fannie and Freddie shut down. I mean, any one of those events would have been the economic disaster of the decade. but they all came in quick procession. I could barely teach the class. We got to the point where we just said, read the Wall Street Journal and come in and let's talk next week.
For many of these individuals and families, this was the largest investment of their lifetime. They didn't have a lot of stocks and bonds and other things to rely on. This was the thing. And so in terms of a tragedy, to me, this is one of the greatest tragedies of all.
I overheard a friend of mine who was a mortgage salesman, a mortgage broker, whatever he was, talking to somebody about getting them doing a refinance. So he started talking about no document loans, and I thought, I had heard of them, but I thought a no document loan applies to the guy in Daisy Hill who you already know is wealthy and you don't need to know his personal business. So we're just gonna write you up because we figure you're good to go. Well, I found out everybody was getting no document loans. And I thought, really? And I said, okay, let's see if we get approved and everything else. And he wrote it up. And then he said, do you need any more money? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, you can get a second mortgage if you wanted to do fix-ups and stuff around here. And I thought, sure. He said, what do you want? What do you mean? How much do I? What's the qualification? He said, you pretty much get whatever you want. And I said, $50,000 ought to be enough.
We were looking for a home, and at that time I lived in the Huff area. But we were looking for a home, my husband and I, something big, because we had 4 children. And the address for there, 3435 East 76th Street, it was the perfect house. The yard was huge. The rooms were big. It easily accommodated 4 children. And I loved the kitchen. But I remember now going back to preview and kind of saying where I was going to buy the home. And someone there said, do you know where you are? It was a white young lady. She says, do you know where you're going? And I said, yeah, it's right. And I kind of explained where it was. I didn't know it was called Slavic Village. And then she said, well, you're moving to Slavic Village. And that meant absolutely nothing. It's just the name of another neighborhood, right? And I said, yeah. And I remember her, after all of this, kind of wrinkling her brow and saying, you should be careful. The first fire was in the front yard. But here, in this back area, the back area was set on fire 4 different times, which totally burned down from the upstairs bedroom all the way down in the porch. The garage, the platform you're standing on now, was the garage. And that was burned down 3 times. First time with our cars in it, then we decided not to put our cars in it anymore, but that didn't delay it from being burned down several more times. But we also were told that because we had had so many fires, that the insurance company no longer would insure us. And so it became necessary then to look for how are we going to repair this house. And that is how we ended up with a new loan.
I was working on a project that was late to pay me. So by the second month, we called and said, we'll have the payment in a week or 10 days or whatever it was. So we called and it fell into the 3rd month. I paid it would have been 2 payments plus the 3rd payment. And the character at the bank says, we can't accept it. You're out. We just can't accept it. You're going into foreclosure.
Did you know what foreclosure meant?
Not exactly. Not exactly. All I knew was if they were going to foreclose, you were going to lose. That seemed to be the history of the foreclosure market as much as I knew about it by then.
After a while, the loan got switched from one company to another company to another company to another company. Each time it was switched, the mortgage went up. Each time it was switched, the rates went up, the fees went up, everything continued to go up.
So how long did you fight to keep it?
I fought that probably 7 to 8 years.
Wow.
It was a long time because I kept getting foreclosed on, and like I said, I kept coming up with those dollar amounts. Now, we were going bankrupt coming up with those dollar amounts, but I kept doing it.
We were told by the folks at our lender that the Fed was going to look at any sort of residential real estate exposure as being a bad loan. And it didn't matter who the borrower was or what kind of position the loan was in. If they had it on their books at all, it was going to be counted as bad debt to them. The way that the construction financing is set up, whether it's for a spec home or a acquisition development loan, they're all set up on like a 1-year rollover. So at the end of each year, that financing needs to be basically renewed by the bank. And 20 years of my business history, and for some of these builders, 30, 40, 50 years of history always told you that as long as you were still in a decent financial situation and you had the ability to service the debt, those things were just rubber stamped and renewed. What started happening was the banks stopped renewing those.
When I was going through it, people were saying, well, you ought to read the small print. There shouldn't be any small print. It's a click of a mouse. Come on, increase the font. What do you mean, small print? Are y'all serious? I had become like a woman who had been abused by her husband, domestic violence. I had become where I was trying to hide it. So how's your mortgage company? It's doing okay. It's doing all right. We're still working on it, but it's coming along, when it wasn't, because so many people had placed the blame on me. And so I just kind of like, I don't think I'm doing anything wrong, but I'm going to send this mortgage payment in a month early. I'm going to send, instead of $480, I'm going to send it even $500. Instead of sending it through the mail, I'm going to send it registered. Instead of, I was doing all these things, and I'm going to call the next day to see if they received it. I was trying to protect myself, but I knew people didn't believe me because it was so early and nobody heard of it.
I think an interesting psychological thing happens to people who are put under that kind of stress, because the alternative is, they'll unleash the pale rider on you, and they really have more options than you do in a situation like that. In this industry, there's always builders who may get a little ahead of themselves and get into a little bit of trouble. But we started hearing things about some builders that I knew to be very solid, reputable companies having some issues with their lenders.
Just almost overnight?
Basically overnight, yeah. We, you basically get a little bit of a notice from the bank that, hey, these financing instruments are coming up in 4 months, and we're not likely to renew them for you. And they politely invite you to leave the bank.
Wow.
And by leave the bank, it means, refinance this stuff elsewhere. The only problem is nobody was doing these loans. So they knew, and we knew, and the builders know that that's not an option. You cannot refinance this stuff elsewhere. In our case, we basically had about a 10-year situation that we dealt with this with them before it really got resolved.
I was elected to county office in 1996. I was in the office of the county treasurer when a few council people came over to visit me from the city of Cleveland, where I had served, and they asked to see me, and they asked me if I had been paying attention to this mortgage foreclosure crisis. And in reality, I had not. I was in charge of collecting property taxes and foreclosing on people for not paying property taxes, but I had really not paid attention to mortgage foreclosures. And it was a real eye-opener.
It was very disruptive to the social fabric of our neighborhood and the families that I worked with, that I put into homes, brand new homes, renovated homes, at a good investment, now was coming home to roost that the market around them was falling apart because of folks who had the irresponsibility of taking advantage of mortgages that should not have been put on the street.
So I would get a spreadsheet, put it out to my investor base, and sell it before we even took ownership. So technically we didn't even own it, any of these assets. Nor did we know what they were, which was really interesting looking back. Could have been a lot, could have been a burnout, could have been a property. And it was sort of an unspoken rule, agreement rather, that we would get more good than we would bad. And that slowly shifted as the housing crisis came into play. I think the banks became more overwhelmed with just almost valueless properties.
Well, like many people, I when the market itself collapsed in 2007, I had been working as a mortgage broker for about 10 years. And overnight, my business was just gone. And financial troubles followed. It led to a personal bankruptcy. It led to a foreclosure. And not unlike a lot of my clients now, when the foreclosure was filed, the entity that was the plaintiff was a company that I'd never heard of before. And it made me wonder, wait a minute, how can this possibly be?
And for me, seeing all these homes being dumped on the market, seeing these kind of investors coming in who had no business owning real estate, had no ability to manage real estate, and in fact no business trying to deal with the tenants that they now have, it was very daunting because I had spent 17 years of my life in a CDC that was working to build houses and rehab houses, stabilize neighborhoods. Now we're starting to see this come home to roost. People that I, myself included, who bought a home, rehabbed a couple homes, moved my family into it, it was very personal for me.
What bank was the first bank that approached you with this $500 for 60 houses?
I'd rather not say,
Okay.
But
It was a large
it
bank?
was one of the largest banks.
Let me ask you, are they still in business?
Indeed, yes they are.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's unbelievable.
The papering of these files really started to accelerate quite a bit. So mortgage companies didn't see the home, didn't walk to the home. They were relying on appraisals that were falsified. They were relying on incomes that were falsified, and it was just basically papering a file because they knew they were going to be pushing these mortgages off to someone else.
And that was one of my arguments, and still is that we really were in just the buying and selling of data, practically, just spreadsheets. I think I inquired one time, hey, what are you guys doing with all this stuff? How are you making money on it when we can't? And I was told that they would do a low down, no monthly payment plan, find local folks that don't qualify for conventional mortgages, get them into the property, have them do repairs, sometimes assist them with repairs.
Contractors were calling me that I had done business with and said, I'm finding it strange that somebody's calling me just asking me to paint the front of the house, just asking me to clean up the front. And that's when we realized the fraud that started to really ramp up was around appraisals, overpriced values, and mortgage companies from out of town who had no idea of the neighborhood itself would get a photo of the house and said, wow, that house looks good, and they were financing it for $90,000 and $100,000.
Interestingly, there were several circumstances here in Cleveland that we presented to as part of our discovery process, where a deed went into to our company and out of our company, and the timestamp is not just the same, obviously, date, hour, minute, second. Wow. So it was and how do you argue that we even owned it?
In these cases, they weren't flipping them improved, they were just flipping them and marking them up. So it was like trading baseball cards. I have these 20 properties that I bought for $1,000 and you're going to get for $5,000. And I was working very closely with prosecutors. I was working with federal investigators, the FBI, and keeping track of these and turning this information and saying there's something wrong here. I can't put my fingertip on what's going on, but these properties are churning and churning, and we can't find who these people are. And it kept transferring to the next person. So it was like the hot potato of who's going to hold this distress house next, until some sucker at the last end that we can find was going to be held accountable.
As time went on, we became just overwhelmed, as everyone else did, with the amount of properties. You know, these 100 a month turned into thousands a month, and we had to take them. You know, obviously you don't want to piss off your bank clients, and you know, it snowballed, and that was one of the main reasons that you know, our company got into some trouble, was that we were still on the hook for violations that, in effect, we couldn't even legally repair. We'd be trespassing. If you can imagine, we sold, you know, it was a lose-lose situation, and we really didn't have a way to sort it out, and in some cases still don't.
I have looked at over 500 homes, easily over 500 homes, since 2005, 2006. And I don't mean drive-by, I mean getting out of the car, walking around the house. My wife definitely thinks this is not a good idea. I would actually agree it's probably not a good idea, but you can't tell what's going on from just a drive-by. You really have to go around the back, because the front of the house might look one way, and you get in the back and realize the doors have been ripped off, and there's water running in the basement, and the pipes have been ripped out.
My name is Frank Ford. I'm Executive Director of Cleveland Housing Renewal Project, a subsidiary of Neighborhood Progress Incorporated. I'm standing out here in front of 1232 Addison in the St. Clair Superior neighborhood in the city of Cleveland. It is May 8th, approximately 12:30 in the afternoon. This is a house owned by Wells Fargo, and when I was out here last Saturday, it was wide open and vacant. It's serviced by Home Ec. There's some stickers on the window from Home Ec. And when I was out here before, the side door was wide open, and there was water rushing in the basement. Side door still wide open. And I think I'm gonna go inside. Anybody here? Think you can hear the water rushing in the basement? This is the basement door. It's probably not enough light to see. But I'm holding the camera over the basement stairs. And I think that's it. I don't think I want to be here too much longer.
As the evidence started to stack up that something was wrong, I stepped away from the idea that I had anything to be ashamed about. The predicament I was in was a predicament that many people were in that were sincere homeowners, and it essentially fired me up to dig into what was going on with the banks and with the states and with the laws and everything in the courts. And I became a student of foreclosure, reaching out to people that I knew that might know something. Meanwhile, the whole backdrop of the incessant collection calls and harassment from, they started right from the beginning. After the first mortgage payment was late, they just continued. But the thing of it was, they weren't going to accept the money. And as time went on, I got comfortable knowing that this was my primary concern on a daily basis, doing whatever was necessary to keep us here, to buy more time, to see what time would bring us on the good side. So once I decided to fight and become a student, then we went day by day and round by round. Each time there was a court hearing, or every time a brief was filed, or anytime there was a meeting with the attorneys, you never know when it was going to take a bad turn. I don't remember exactly what I proposed, but the bank came back and said, we'll give you 30 days and give you $5,000, you get out of the house. And I just looked at the guy and I said, not after the amount of time that I spent defending this. We're going all the way. It's like any other bully. If you punch them in the mouth, they're going to wonder, should they keep bullying you? And they didn't have many people that stood up to them because they're used to getting their way. But as the tidal wave came, more and more information was coming in from so many different areas. That's when I realized I'm going to fight this thing to the bitter end.
They told me that I couldn't be insured anymore. So that meant I need to go out and find some place where I could get this money to fix this home. And so I was refinanced. And I was refinanced, I can't remember what the company was, but they sold the mortgage and sold the mortgage. And it finally ended up with Fairbanks, which is now SPS Mortgage. Everything went crazy. My notes were almost doubled. They constantly said they didn't get the money. It was just a mess. And I was quiet about it at first, but then it got so bad that I needed help. And so I started saying, even though I didn't know it was predatory lending, even though I didn't know it was intentional, I started speaking about it once I got to an organization called ESOP. I began to see that it was happening in my neighborhood. I wasn't sure it was predatory lending because the difference between them and me is that I was black and they weren't. And so I thought maybe it's something else. But as people began to lose their homes and began to do more renting, and even the people who were renting began to be evicted because the landlords didn't tell them that their home was in foreclosure, I began to realize what was going on.
So at that point, it was affecting everyone.
Everyone.
Black, white.
It didn't
rich,
matter.
poor.
It didn't matter. The color, I keep telling people, the color went from black and white to green. It was all about the money.
We're really battling challenging times. So some of the houses on our left, we've taken through design review for demolition. A property that is burned was owned by an out-of-town interest. The house next to it was also a house that got vandalized. It's owned by somebody in Hawaii who bought it out of a state forfeiture sale. Every time you think that people are going to get smarter and have seen the housing meltdown, they'll still go buy these low-value properties. You still see the infomercials and see the TV shows, Flip or Flop, or any number of these shows that encourage people to buy real estate who really don't have the ability to manage or the experience to manage. So many of these properties are being sold land contract or triple net, where some unsuspecting person thinks for a few $100s down and a few $100s a month they can make this their dream home, but they just can't. Any number of small triggers to us, a bad furnace, a bad roof, some crisis in the home like a lost job, that you would think that we can weather that small crisis, and some folks walk away because I don't have $10,000 to fix a roof. I don't have $5,000 to replace a furnace. And the value of what I'm dealing with, I can't get a loan, or it's the last tipping point that causes this to go bad. So I usually walk through and make sure the power's off, there's no gas, there's nothing hazardous before I call for a board up. As I walk down the basement, I turn my flashlight on, and fortunately my cell phone sounds like a taser powering up. I walked down to the bottom of the stairs, turned, and there was this tall teenager in the corner hiding behind the chimney. And he came out, I stepped back, and he ran up the stairs. And I thought, that's the last time I'm going through vacant houses and basements.
We call them the abandoned houses. And if you really say abandoned houses, it really doesn't sound so bad until you look at the results of abandoned houses. When you see the broken out windows and the glass and the uncut grass and the doors hanging off of the house and the ruckus that goes on in the inside of the house, that's when you really see what's going on.
in 2007, when it all hit the fan, what was your reaction?
Well, I lost my job because National City had to start unloading stuff. And there were people at National City who saw this. I mean,
Why didn't they have the kind of influence to make some adjustments in 2003?
the shareholders get used to a certain return. You give up that business, what are you going to replace it with? You get caught up in that too.
By 2008, just to give you another example of something, Deutsche Bank owned 800 homes in Cleveland that they had foreclosed on. A high percentage of those were vacant and abandoned. Wells Fargo was next with, I think, something like 600. Those are numbers that, you know, Deutsche Bank and Wells Fargo didn't expect that either.
When you start losing thousands of homes at a time in the city, we're stuck with cleaning up the mess, and we're still cleaning up the mess. We're doing demolition, we're cutting vacant land, we're maintaining a property that we never thought we would have to be in the business to maintain. You could strip a house, get a couple $1,000s in scrap metal because copper was over $1 a pound, steel was $1 a ton. You started seeing the dollar value of scrap. Now these vacant houses became a tool for folks to go make money because there was nobody behind to protect that asset. The mortgage companies were out of business. The people have long gone. So houses were getting stripped at an incredible level, which then left us with a negative asset.
When you first walked into one of these Slavic village homes that had just been a data point on a spreadsheet previously, what was your reaction?
Holy shit. Oh fuck, if I'm allowed to curse, I'm sorry, but it was a holy shit moment. I mean, I was used to inner cities since day one, and when I started doing some of the landlording, if you will, tough towns, you know. This was like something I had never, ever seen. You know, I was in sort of a sense of shock and awe when I first got to Cleveland. You know, I had never been involved in anything illegal or the penal system. I didn't know what an indictment was. I mean, I had a real heavy learning curve to get through. The first thing we did was we fought extradition. I felt I should be able to fight this from home, which at the time was Florida. We lost pretty much every single thing that we ever challenged, I was eventually extradited, and I got a little tour around Cleveland on the way to the jail center, and it's a tough jail. Cuyahoga County Jail it can be difficult.
And what was your impression of him when you first saw him in court?
He looked like Slick Willie. I mean, it was very polished, a professional. He knew what he was doing. This wasn't somebody who was bumbling their way through, and he clearly knew what was going on, and that was really heartbreaking for me to see somebody who the first time they come to Cleveland is when they're extradited here from Florida out of their $1 million home off their $1 million yacht to show up and say, I had no accountability for this.
And then the bond at the time, I think, was $7 or $8 million. The prosecution, I believe, thought they had a much wealthier individual. I had no choice but to sit at the jail center with a view over Lake Erie. It was a shitty little window, but a view over Lake Erie and the Browns Stadium, if you could peek out and see. And eventually, you know, a reasonable bond was proposed, and I bonded out. Was, you know, mandated to stay in Cuyahoga County. And we were gearing up for a long, arduous battle, and then out of nowhere, a plea agreement was proposed, which did not include jail time, at least to my understanding. And then, of course, I went to sentencing, where I was sentenced to 10 years, you know, having to serve 2 with a potential for a judicial release in 6 months, which nobody saw coming. I mean, we didn't see it coming. I went out the back of the courthouse in shackles and cuffs, and it, you know, then was processed into the penal system for the state of Ohio. Went to the reception center, and then in Lorain, and then on to Richland Correctional, which is a level 2. It's not. Everybody thinks, you know, Murphy got sent to a club fed type of thing, and it was not that. It's an L2, and there's some bad guys. There's some good guys, but there are some pretty tough characters in there.
So I had no idea who Blaine Murphy was at the time, and only until the investigators said, you know, this was an alias, and it was somebody who was going under a pseudonym.
The Bryce Peters name.
Yes, he was one of the first that we were able to get our hands on. We had already had prosecutions around some mortgage fraud, some folks who were packaging bad mortgage deals, and had gotten some convictions through that. This is the first one that we've got caught that was wholesaling properties at the level that he was. So the aliases that he had created was what he was convicted of, along with most of the electronic convictions that go with it in terms of wire fraud, et cetera. To see that he was convicted and see that somebody was held accountable was a real big sigh of relief for the neighborhood, because the neighborhood was literally destroyed by what was going on with the flipping that was going on in our neighborhood, and no one to hold accountable, and that was very frustrating. So I think it was a little relief. The sentence itself was an interesting and fascinating sentence, but the amount of time, whether it was 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years, I think was less of a relief for us, is more the fact that we held somebody accountable for it, and the residents, you know, look for us as legislative leaders to say, what are you doing about this? And this was a good success for us to say, you know, we finally held someone accountable.
Some people use the medical metaphor of the community is a body and it has cancer cells, the vacant blighted homes. And removing them by demolition is the equivalent of the surgery. I know that there are housing preservationists, historic preservation advocates who don't like to see the demolition, and I actually understand that. I've been in homes where there's leaded glass windows, there's oak flooring, I mean, characteristics from turn of the century that we're not going to see again. We haven't seen that kind of construction. But at the same time, the neighbors across the street are trying to hold on, you know, and have to live next to that house, which may have wide open doors. Their kids could get in there. It's dangerous. The metaphor that I actually like better, which comes from the CEO of our county land bank, Gus Frangos. I don't know if he still uses this metaphor, but I've been borrowing it. He said, imagine a barrel of apples, and that's the community. And there's 100 apples in the barrel, and 10 of them are rotten. Well, you know, there's 10 now, but you can't just say that's going to stay static, because the 10 that are that way are coming up against others that are whole. They're going to contaminate the others, and then they'll contaminate. That's going to continue unless you do something about it.
Well, in 2007, in December, a group of us got together and decided we had to come up with a solution, not to stop the foreclosure crisis. That was over. I mean, it was well underway. We were looking for a way to create a vehicle that could help the county, and in particular my office at the time, the county treasury, to get control of all these vacant and abandoned properties. Because it wasn't bad enough they were being foreclosed once. Once they were foreclosed, the owner of this, often the federal government, HUD, Fannie, was selling them back out on the market for just a pittance, and they were being bought by speculators. So what we did was we decided we needed to create a quasi-public authority to take control of these properties. We went to Genesee County, Michigan, Flint, where a county treasurer there had started something called the County Land Banks. We wrote a bill in late 2007, took to Columbus. In January of 2008, found good sponsors locally. And by that December, we passed a bill allowing for the creation of county land banks, initially only in Cuyahoga County. Within a year, it was amended to allow any county over 60,000 in population, and it was amended a third time in 2015 to allow every county in Ohio to have them.
So here was an opportunity for us to bring real estate in, and demolition became an important tool. And we started demolishing at a pretty incredible clip, because the simple math was we had excess distress homes than the system could absorb. So we needed to, it was simple math for me, the numerator, denominator, and you had to change that number. So in order to squeeze that vacancy rate, let's get rid of the worst properties. Let's use demolition as an effective tool, and I think it has been an effective tool.
So today, this land bank, for example, brings in close to between 150 and 200 properties a month. It's still that aggressive. So the milk has stopped pouring out. That much we can say has occurred. But so much milk got spilt that the mop-up, requires a lot more work.
We're trying to stay ahead of the problem with a bulldozer and with foreclosure and board of revision sales and working with our county land bank. At the same time, knowing that we have a long haul to mothball properties until we see what recovery gradually comes out of an economic crisis and a meltdown that has been a struggle for us.
When we bring a home in, there's no shortcut. You have to do inspections, and what we do is we have what's called a level 1. The level 1 inspection is, and it's a form that has all the major systems on it. We go and look at the roof, the mechanicals, mold, structure, all that kind of stuff to determine whether this property still has sufficient bones to be rehabbed. We do the level 1, we do the pictures, we clean it out with our trash out crews, and then we have about 50 or 60 or 70 pictures of the interior of the home so that we can always be accountable, because people do look at homes and they say, oh, wouldn't this be wonderful, but they don't see what's inside of it. It's terrible. Conversely, sometimes it's terrible on the outside, but it's beautiful on the inside. So again, there's just no shortcut.
Currently, we have a total of maybe about 17 rehabs that we're done project managing. Some we haven't started. We're actually still preparing the specs, and we're still actually trying to get the comps together for the neighborhoods that we're going to do the rehab in to make sure that it makes sense as far as the investment piece of it, and also affordability for the people that's going to participate in the programs or that's going to purchase the properties.
In other words, if a property requires $30,000 or $40,000 to rehab, for example, but the market, even on its best day, will only result in $20,000 or $30,000, very difficult to get the private sector to participate in that. So we either kick it to our nonprofit section, where we try to find either churches or social service agencies that can maybe use a property who don't have the profit threshold as a private investor. But if we can't, then that property, even though it may have decent bones on it, gets pushed to demolition as well, because it's just not marketable. So when we were getting a blended mix of properties from Fannie Mae, HUD, and tax foreclosure, 40% was being rehabbed, 60% was being demolished.
We just couldn't manage the flow of the amount of foreclosures that was swamping in on us. And even when we did invest in some of the rehabs, by the time we were done rehabbing the house, we had more invested in it than the house was worth. And at the same time investing in that house, the next 5 houses next to it had gone bad and became condemned and distressed. So we even had a hard time marketing the homes that we were rehabbing.
I grew up in Shaker Heights, Ohio, in the suburbs. My family, though, is from the city, right here in Slavic Village, actually. My father grew up, was born and raised here. My grandfather was a Teamster and moved bricks from place to place and drove beer trucks and that kind of thing. And when business was slow and the community was prospering, he would get his group of men together, the union men, and they would put houses on stilts and hand dig the basements for those houses and then drop the houses back on the foundation. So literally, my family is responsible for the foundation of this neighborhood. My father started in banking in the early 1920s and was part of an organization called the Pyramid Savings and Loan, which eventually, in 1929, when it closed its doors, it closed for good. And from that, my father spent the next 7 or 8 years working on collecting mortgage payments, collecting rents, selling the real estate of the company, and earning enough money not only to pay back everyone who lost money in that pyramid savings and loan, 100 cents and $1, but had a few dollars left over to take my mom out for a date or two before they got married.
So it was born out of the 1929 crash.
Yes, it was. And based on the fact that my father was able to pay back those people from the community. He was able to go back to those same people in the community and say, look, I'm starting a new savings and loan. I'd like for you to help me put up seed money for the savings and loan, and was able to raise $50,000 back then from the local community for the start of Third Federal. I thought banking would be a nice backup for me in case something else didn't work out. So in the 1970s, I joined another bank here in town and worked there for 5 years before coming to work for Third Federal in 1982.
What was your experience here at Third Federal with the home foreclosure crisis that then came to affect the neighborhood so powerfully?
Yeah. Well, the effect that the crisis had on Third Federal was pretty serious. You know, we at one time had about a 30% market share in this particular neighborhood in Slavic Village. And we watched that dwindle down to 4 or 5% because many of the predatory lenders had entered into the area making deals that we couldn't even fathom making, deals that we knew if the economy went bad, that people wouldn't be able to pay on their mortgages. So we stayed on the sidelines and kind of watched this all happen. It was a sad situation because we prided ourselves on lending back into our own community. But the Slavic Village area and a lot of the areas of Cleveland and the inner ring suburbs suffered greatly because of the predatory lending.
In 2005, the east side of Cleveland, median home sale price was $75,000 to $80,000, which, you know, to viewers and listeners might say, well, that's not a lot of money. But in the Cleveland market, that was something. Well, they dropped to like 5,000, median of 5,000. You know, and if you look at this on a graph, it is a striking drop on the east side of Cleveland. What that represents is a tragedy in terms of the history of housing in this country, because that's homeowners' equity. You know, and for many homeowners on the east side of Cleveland, and we're talking the east side of Cleveland is predominantly African-American homeowners. For many of these individuals and families, this was the largest investment of their lifetime.
So tell me, when you were growing up, what East Cleveland was like in the neighborhood where you lived.
Well, the neighborhood I lived, it was like a community of homeowners, and it was like a good place to live. People took care of their grass, cut the yards, took care of the community. Everybody looked out for everybody. East Cleveland was the same way. You know what I'm saying? Everybody knew everybody. Most of the people that I knew from East Cleveland, I knew from elementary. We all went to elementary, junior high, high school, and even college together.
Well, according to the media, East Cleveland is one of the roughest cities that you could live in. If you look at all the abandoned buildings and all the dilapidated places, kids got to walk past this every day, so they have to see it. But what they don't talk about is the kids that are here in the city. You got kids that still go to school. You got families that still love their kids. You got families over there, look, a mama hugging her daughter. A whole family of people sticking together, loving each other. They think that we don't love each other in East Cleveland, but we do. So that's one of the biggest misconceptions, that we actually don't care. We actually do.
So I was totally amazed, shocked, felt somewhat intimidated when I found out that I actually would be speaking to Barack, that he would be the last person on stage, and that I would be asking him questions about predatory lending and what he would do to change the course of the housing crisis.
Just like Iowa, in the 1990s, predatory lenders descended on my neighborhood of Slavic Village in Cleveland, Ohio.
And we really had gone through a routine where they kind of prepped you, told you what to say and all of that. And my organizer, Mark Seifert, has said several times, well, you know, she's probably not going to say what you have drilled her to say, because she's probably going to just speak from her heart at that time.
Some things aren't right, and other things ain't right. Predatory lending ain't right.
And I actually had convinced myself that no, I will definitely say what's on this little piece of paper. But as I sat there and listened to other people go up, different thoughts came in my mind. And I thought about predatory lending and how heady it can seem, and if there was a way that I could just break it down so that almost anybody could understand it, even a presidential candidate.
We need a moratorium on adjustable rate mortgages. Families that used to sit in their homes around the kitchen table are now sitting around a steering wheel. Some children who should be in their beds at night are laying on the back seats of cars. Their closets are the trunks of those cars. And what should be a personal bathroom is now a bathroom in any public area. It ain't right.
It ain't right.
I felt good at the end of it. And I began to see him and other candidates as people, you know, and that we sometimes can present things so big or so out of the human element that we look at so much data and we look at so much that sometimes we'll fail to see the heart. We'll fail to see where people actually fit in. And I wanted to make sure that he saw the people, that he saw the children, that he was actually able to see what we were talking about.
My name is Mark Dan. I'm the managing partner of Dan Law, and we sue banks.
Chuck came to us shortly after summary judgment was granted in his foreclosure case. So we got involved very, very late in the game. The court had ruled against him, and he wanted to take an appeal of that decision, and that's where we came in.
A friend of mine had told me about a lawyer in town by the name of Mark Dan, who was the former Attorney General of the great state of Ohio. And he came back into private practice as really the only foreclosure expert of his integrity that I knew existed.
We actually started defending foreclosures, and have our practice has grown as the regulatory climate got a little bit better with Dodd-Frank, and the changes that have been made to the Truth in Lending Act and the Real Estate Settlement Procedure Act.
In almost every single foreclosure case, it's never as simple as the borrower borrowed money from the lender and then for whatever reason was not able to repay that money. Especially on the older loans, the prior crisis loans, it's not at all unusual to see the entity that is the plaintiff in the foreclosure is not the entity that the borrower ever borrowed any money from, and may not even be the second or third entity in the stream. The loans are being bought and sold and traded so quickly that a lot of times the borrowers don't even know who it is that they owe the money to. And that was part of the issue in Chuck's case, was his loan had been transferred many, many times. And so there was a question of, is the party that's suing him, can they even establish that they're the party that he owes any money to?
All right. Please be seated.
Thank you for your patience. We have 2 additional cases to be heard. Call the next case.
U.S. Bank National Association as trustee et al. Versus Mary Claire Franco.
Good morning, Your Honors. William Behrens on behalf of the appellants Mary Claire Franco and Charles Stinnett Jr.
Thank you.
Your Honor, we're here on an appeal of a granting of summary judgment in a foreclosure action. This is the fourth foreclosure action that was filed on the same notes alleging a default in 2007. We've noticed 4 errors in the trial court's reasoning. First of all, trial court's decision adopting the magistrate's decision was completely bereft of any reasoning as to how that conclusion was reached.
But isn't the trial judge's only obligation to independently review and then just say yay or nay?
And that is our concern, Your Honor, is that under Civil Rule 53 D4D, there's no evidence that there was an independent review. The second assignment of error is that in granting summary judgments, the trial court improperly weighed evidence. And what should have happened is the case should have been referred to trial. The third assignment of error goes to the appellee's right to enforce the notes. The case law of the 8th District has been that borrowers do not have standing to challenge a negotiation of a note or an assignment of mortgage. This is a lost note, so it almost becomes a what comes first, the chicken or the egg argument. Can you be a non-holder in possession of the note with the rights to enforce it, and then lose possession of that note and be able to claim a right to enforce a lost note?
I mean, this can't be the first lost note. I mean, a building went down in New York, right? So this is not the first lost note. So anything you can cite to that can support your claims?
I had no other cases that I cited to in the brief.
May it please the court, my name is David Wallace. I am here today on behalf of the Appellee U.S. Bank National Association as trustee. I think the full name of the trust is important here. It's U.S. Bank National Association as trustee, successor in interest to Bank of America National Association. As trustee, as successor by merger to LaSalle Bank, N.A. as trustee.
Only the banks could make this statement.
Right, well, we're trying to make that chain clear. Bank of America is a predecessor trustee to U.S. Bank. And there's also evidence in the record that shows that U.S. Bank purchased Bank of America's trust business and became the successor trustee. So there's evidence in the record that shows a clear line from the original lender to U.S. Bank. And the evidence is that the note was lodged in the trust in 2005, and it was there until it was lost. I wish I had the note and I could come in here with it. Sometimes I do come to the oral arguments with the note in my hand and say, see, I've got it. I can't do that today. But the evidence below shows that this trust, U.S. Bank, is the right entity to enforce this note. There's no evidence that any other entity is the right entity to enforce this note. The trial court got it right, and this court should affirm the trial court's judgment.
There is no merger documents to show the succession from Washington Mutual Bank to LaSalle Bank as trustee to Bank of America, from Bank of America to U.S. Bank. The other concern that I have is that when we talk about the standing argument, we've asked this court to overrule the prior decisions that the borrower lacks standing. In our view, Ms. Franco and Mr. Stimac have the most personal of stakes in this controversy. There has been a foreclosure judgment granted that is going to deprive them of their home. Whether or not Fannie Mae ever shows up, whether or not some other entity eventually claims an interest in the notes, they're going to have their house go to sheriff's sale the way things stand right now. There can be no more personal stake in the outcome of the controversy, and that's also a very concrete injury.
Have they been paying their monthly?
They have not been, Your Honor.
How many years have gone by?
This was a default in 2007, Your Honor.
So is there a possibility that when all's said and done, they're going to owe even more than when the house is sold at sheriff's sale?
It is very likely.
And so the banks can personally go after them for the amount still due and owing, right?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Anything additional, Salvation?
No, Your Honor. Thank you very much.
Thanks to both of you. U.S. Bank v. Franco, heard and submitted.
I've had cases where I thought, boy, there's no way we're ever going to win this, and we've won the appeal. I've had cases where I thought, boy, there's no way we're going to lose, and we've lost the appeal.
Even if we lose, it's still not the end. It's not like we're going to be out of the house in 2 days. there's other strategies and other things that maybe we implement, maybe we don't, we'll see. But now that it's on the books, the bank does not want to be vulnerable on this. They do not want to lose an appeal.
Well, I mean, it's a risk on either end.
Yeah.
So, I mean, whenever these cases can be resolved short of having to get a decision, it's in everyone's best interest.
I didn't know quite what to expect, but that very same day, first day I met Tony, the judge had us back into his chambers, took off his robe, and now I'm looking at just a guy. And I could tell he was a legitimately concerned guy. And he said, look, I'm not trying to put anybody back to prison here. I'm not trying to make barriers that are impossible. But he laid out what he wanted. And I took it very, very seriously.
I knew he had some houses in our neighborhood, and there was one in particular in the Forest City neighborhood that had become a real problem, and said, let's ask for him to have to serve the balance of his time in probation living in one of his own homes, and on top of that do community service. When we do community court agreements and community sanction agreements, there is some sense of responsibility that we have to give them, not just meaningful work, but what will fulfill the judge's orders. So that was a concern. It's like, well, what can we do to make sure that he does what he's supposed to do in order for him to not have to go back to jail?
Of course, the press loved the fact that I'd have to work for my, at the time, nemesis, Councilman Brancatelli and his whole crew. And, you know, that became an interesting run.
I did not expect him to embrace this one bit. We had worked with folks who had been sentenced to court community service and court control. We had people who had been sentenced to live in their home before in a very short period of time, and none of them embraced it. We had a block club in that neighborhood called Forest City Civic Association, and they had been hit hard by the mortgage crisis. They had a lot of abandoned properties, and so the property that he was sentenced to live in, we said, here's what you're going to do. You're going to work with this nonprofit or the civic organization through Slavic Village Development, the nonprofit. You're going to help board up houses. You're going to help pick up debris. You're basically going to do what court community service workers generally do when they get sentenced, only you're going to do this over a year period of time.
No, I was petrified the neighbors were going to hate me. And I got a knock on the door the first night. I get a knock on the door. I'm like, oh, here we go. Let's see what this is about. And it was my neighbor, Harold. I didn't know who it was, but it's a guy. Got a bunch of clothes. And he's like, hey, brother, we've all been in some trouble over the years. You probably need some clothes. You know, if you need something else, we're just across the street. All in all, I was surprisingly well received, and it was it bolstered me because you're down and out. You just get out of prison. I've lost all my money. I'm horrified. I don't know what my future is, and to have somebody come and say, hey man, here's some clothes. Need anything else? I was like, well, this might actually be okay. And then the first time I went to one of the housing club meetings, I asked the leader at the time, who's since become a dear friend, I'm like, man, are they gonna throw fucking tomatoes at me? Like, I don't know what to expect. And she's like, well, I don't know. She said, I don't know, but let's go. And held my hand, and she said, you're my new best friend, sort of joking. And I sat down, and everybody was fine. And in fact, I don't think anyone even mentioned that I was out, that I was not necessarily mandated to be in that meeting, but mandated to help the community.
I was expecting him to be spending a lot of time driving around in his truck, sipping frappuccinos and giving the community the middle finger. It was quite the opposite. He embraced his responsibility, and he took it a step further than what I had put in paper. He engaged the local community development corporation, started working out of their offices, and went right to work. And he worked very closely with the local block club and Forest City Civic Association, started showing up at their meetings, and I can tell you firsthand, they were very suspect. Like, okay, here's one of the people that was responsible, and even though he was only responsible for one house in their neighborhood, they had hundreds of houses that were abandoned, and he was going to be the poster child for that. He started showing up at the meetings. He started hauling kids around and chauffeuring all the way to taking kids to their prom dates and helping pay for them to get their first suit, to showing up when a house was open and boarding it up, hauling the tires out to the street, and working with the local block club in a very meaningful way, and was putting in a lot of hours. I would get emails and text messages from him in the middle of the night. Hey, what about this? Should I do this tomorrow? Can I do this the next day? And he was fully engaged. morning, noon, and night, to be involved and immersed in that community, and really won over the residents there for the most part that he was there to serve a sentence and to provide a service and fulfill what he said he was going to do.
We spent a lot of time together. I mean, just from day one, showing me the neighborhood, showing me the office, showing me just how things worked politically and also with a nonprofit like Slavic Village Development where I worked. Many times I would make his coffee in the morning at the shop. I'd be one of the first ones there. He's the first one there. He's already working at like 7 a.m., some ridiculous hour. And he'd be the last guy that I would see at a friend's house before I had to scoot back for my 9 o'clock, curfew for probation. So we spent a great deal of time, and I grew to love the guy. I mean, you can't not like Tony. He's one of the hardest working people I've ever met. Certainly not what I think of as a politician in these particular times. Everybody else is first, at least in my impression. Everything we ever asked for, either myself when I needed something for a project for the community or my community group needed something, either him or his team, they came through every time. And I made sure I did the same.
And in a year's time, he really transformed that civic organization from, maybe 10, 15 people showing up to a meeting to now we started getting 50 people at a time coming out to the meeting and being engaged in the cookouts and being engaged in the cleanups. And if you drive through the neighborhood now, it's significantly better because of his engagement and how that engagement has carried through years later, that they have a very strong block club over there now. They have signage as you come into the gateway. They're empowered. They certainly hold me accountable, continue to hold me accountable, but they also stay engaged with Blaine and stay in communication. And Blaine comes back now and then and visits them and continues to prop them up and say, you guys are doing a great job. I carry a couple pictures with me, and it's the before and after, and both of them were in the same setting, in a courtroom. The day that I first met him, and he was in an orange jumpsuit, handcuffed, and I was walking behind him after testifying, to the day he was released, and he was hugging Linda Lewis and saying, in a very tearful goodbye, that he needed to get out of town. He finished his sentence, and he was going back to Florida. It's the tale of two cities, from when we first met him to when he left.
So my initial reaction to send me back to prison was really quite selfish at the time, and I'm grateful for what he proposed. I mean, it really, so many great things came out of it, and I'm sure he didn't even imagine that I'd be able to pull off any of this crap. And I don't think I know I couldn't have without the cooperation of the community, my dear friends, Brancatelli. I mean, without all those folks, Slavic Village Development, my family had to support me. I'm up here, I'm not making any money here. And it ended up, I think, a really good story. I think it's still ongoing, which is good. My part has obviously faded away a bit, but some of the good stuff that we started it's still occurring every day, and that's pretty cool. And I was really happy to be a part of it.
And I think he fell in love with the community. He fell in love with the people, and they weren't the angry, bitter people that he may have thought when he first said he wanted to go back to jail. But they were people who were concerned about the community, and then became concerned about him and making sure that he was able to serve his time and get back to his freedom.
I had been to Third Federal before when it was just a little, and when I walked in the bank, it was so cold. People looked at me like, where in the hell did you come from? People looked at me like I was green. Well, no, I guess they looked at me like I was black, really. But anyway, they looked at me like, where'd you come from? How did you get in here? And what are you doing here? And I felt so totally, and all I was trying to do at that time was actually open up a little savings account. And I actually laughed.
Well, Barbara Anderson was part of the Union Miles Development Corporation way back in the early 90s. And back then, Union Miles they were taking all the banks literally to court in some cases to get money for inner city development. they were very radical back then. In the early 90s, they were very much known for marching on branch offices of companies, even the homes of the CEOs.
His bank felt like the butt of it set up against the black neighborhood. Don't come this way. And I didn't like him. I didn't like him for that. Finally, I got angry. I lived close enough to, I could actually walk to Third Federal. And there was a dead rat in the backyard that my gray cat, we called her Dusty, had killed. I said, I should take this rat over there. And I'm a little squeamish, but I'm still thinking, this is what I need to do. And I'm just gonna take him over there because they need to know they're rats. And at that time, we were actually throwing sharks at banks, the little plastic sharks. We were actually leaving those everywhere, all in the grass, so that when the lawnmower came, whoever it would get cut up and all this kind of stuff. So we were doing that. But I thought this would make a better point. Y'all are rats.
And so she called me and she said, we'd like to meet. And I said, fine, let's meet. Wherever you'd like to meet, I'll meet. So we went over to the old library on Miles Road, which is a deep, dark, scary, ugly place. It hasn't been used in years, but that was one of the places they wanted to meet. I took 2 other officers with me from the bank, and I told them to dress down, dress casually, because if we dress up, we're going to be a little intimidating. We'll be just like everyone else, and we're not like everyone else, because we do have a soft spot in our heart for the local community.
Mark actually came to the next meeting, and at the end of the meeting, he said something to me that made me kind of think, maybe this guy is going to be okay.
My family was born and raised here. We have a strong commitment to the local community. We're going to be building a $50 million facility here. We're not going anywhere. And they kind of were convinced, but they said, well, how do we know? How do we know without having that on paper? What happens to the dream if something should happen to you?
And he said, I'm going to do something that probably no other banker will ever do.
I said, you have my word, and here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to give you a different kind of signature. And I walked over to her, gave her a big hug, a kiss on the cheek, and I said, this is going to solidify my agreement to you and to the Union Miles Development Corporation.
And I said, I was thinking, handshake, kiss on the cheek. Okay, if that's how we're going to make a deal, that's fair. He said, we will work together. And that's exactly what we did. And from that day to this one, I can always depend on Mark. And I don't mean always just the money, but I mean I can depend on Mark to stand by what is true and fair.
Some of us pushed really hard on demolition, and Jim Rokakis and Gus Frangos and others who worked very hard to create a local county land bank for the state of Ohio, the first one ever. Modeled it after Flint, Michigan. Ours is pretty much Flint on steroids. It's much bigger. We need to have bigger actions to be able to take in the inventory because the banks weren't managing it well.
Those land banks have raised, through this office, I'm very proud of it, about $440 million through a variety of sources to take down well over 20,000 vacant and abandoned properties. And we have a long way to go. That's what we've done. We've been able to prove that taking vacant properties down makes neighborhoods more stable, it returns property values, it makes neighborhoods safer, and it gives neighborhoods a fighting chance going forward.
I think at that time, people would have estimated between 25 and 30,000 vacant and abandoned, like condemned properties, dangerous, needed to come down, and we're probably by about 7,000 now. So neighborhoods, just in terms of the elimination of sheer blight, we've done a tremendous amount of good. And if you wanted to take it down to an intuitive level, if you were a homeowner and you lived in a house and you had one of these next to you, you'd be thrilled to have that gone.
What you want to have happen is the homeowners on the streets begin to say, I see positive things happening. I'm going to stay here. I don't need to leave and go to another place. I'm willing to stay here because I see that bad home got taken down. This home is being repaired. I think I'll put some money into my home. That's the kind of thing you want. You want to send a message of confidence to what's happening. And I believe that that is starting to happen.
In areas where there's a pulse in the market, we've made a big difference there because homes are, they're like tipping neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods could have tipped down or they could have tipped up. And sometimes on a street, 2 or 3 houses can make that difference.
And you started seeing little by little the county land bank shifting from being primarily demolition to now renovating houses. And they've put well over 1,000 houses back in the market. They've helped stabilize housing conditions by bringing in distressed properties and finding qualified investors and homeowners to move into the properties. So we're starting to see that tide change, and that's been a very good tool.
Generally, our properties have been selling, from my experience, within 60 to 90 days. Some of them sell as soon as we get finished.
Slavic Village is an interesting case study because it was ground zero, a once vibrant community. It was decimated by the foreclosure crisis. But this is where leadership makes a difference. The greatest untold story, in my opinion, is that you have the county treasurer, the county prosecutor, the county clerk, the county auditor, the county sheriff, and the land bank all working in unison. And so when you have leadership like that, it's very easy to follow. So in that instance, Slavic Village, it's tremendous what's happening there. They've turned it around, quite frankly.
I was living in LA, had a good job, and I got approved for a home loan, but the house was like $400,000, and I was like, wow. So I'm online and I'm looking, and I'm like, man, houses in Cleveland like $12,000. What's going on? Why are the houses so cheap in neighborhoods that I grew up in? And I'm looking at the houses, looking at the streets, and I'm like, why are these houses so cheap? What's going on in Cleveland? So my daughter was born in 2006, so I moved back to Cleveland. And I decided I wanted to buy a house. So I looked all over Cleveland, found houses for $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. And I'm like, this can't be real. And then that's when the whole news came about the foreclosure crisis. People started getting those loans back when I was thinking about getting one in LA. They're losing their houses because they couldn't afford the loans. The interest rates went up and people were losing houses left and right. And it moved from there, and I seen it happen in Cleveland. I just so happened to be here at the right time, and I found my house. It was a HUD house that was foreclosed on. The house had sold for like $100,000, like in 2003 or something like that. And I was able to get it on the bid on the HUD site. What is it? The Housing Urban Development website, HUD. They had an auction. I went on their site and found this house.
This house that we're in right now.
Yes.
And
in 2009.
And 5 or 6 years before you bought it, it was a $100,000 house.
Yes.
And do you mind telling us how much you paid for it when you bought it?
I bid it like $10,000 for the house. Yeah, but it didn't cost me $10,000 because Obama had the first-time homeowners program. There's certain things that you can do to help you out to get yourself going. So I took advantage of those things. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that I would live in this neighborhood, knowing how it was when I was young. How this was like a prime area. It's like right in a good district. It's close to Coventry. It's close to East Cleveland. It's like right in the middle, close to university hospitals. And for the house to be this cheap, it was like, wow, this is a dream come true for me.
Well, the proceedings ended. We then went into a waiting period to hear what the court would decide. And ultimately, the decision we wanted was that, in fact, we would be granted the opportunity to have a full trial on my case rather than have the foreclosure stand.
Because there really was no middle ground there. Either we prevailed on appeal and the court found that the transfer of the note had been so defective that the plaintiff had no right to enforce it, or the court found that they did have that right. There was no middle ground. So if a win is that the court was going to effectively nullify his note and mortgage and leave him with a house that either had no mortgage on it or had an unenforceable mortgage, the odds were always against us. Courts really don't want to reach that result, and they'll do everything they can not to reach that result.
So I got an email from Mark Dan and Bill Behrens, and in the email they said to me that I would have to find a new hobby, because for 11 years, this essentially was my hobby, defending my wife and I.
His lender offered him a loan modification that acknowledged, first of all, the original loan amount and all of the interest that had accrued on the loan in the years since, but then also acknowledged the present market value of the property.
So there was a big chunk of money that had accrued to the tune of about $565,000 total. The county auditor has the house listed at being worth $304,000 as of their last evaluation.
And then he has the possibility, if he makes consistent, timely payments, to have that deferred balance forgiven in chunks over time.
I'm 67 years old, so maybe I'll have it paid off by the time I'm 102. But that's not the point. They had to stretch it out so they could bring the payment down. So $1,950 a month for the first, I think, 3 to 5 years, and then the payment might go up $50 a month after that. And that'll be principal, interest, insurance, and if there's any other little oddball stuff.
So ultimately, Chuck's going to end up with a house that has some equity in it, and he's got a market or an interest rate that's consistent with what the current market rates are.
Essentially, we're right back to being a regular homeowner. There's no dealings with the court or attorneys. We're just regular people paying our mortgage, which we wanted to do 11 years ago, but weren't allowed. So I don't think under any other circumstances we would have gotten a better deal than what we were looking for. We were not looking for a free house. We were looking for fair and equitable people who had the authority, the power, the will, and the determination to cut a deal in good faith. And we finally got that.
Well, many of the homes here in Slavic Village are more than 100 years old. And we looked at this plot of land back behind our office and said, you know, we could leave those homes because we were beginning to buy up the properties there and refurbish them, or just knock them down and start anew. But, you know, we knew that the neighborhood needed more houses, more homes for people that were going to live here for a long time. And so we decided that the best place to start would be as close to Third Federal as possible, since we own the land.
Well, you know, this trailside is a very unique development. I can remember in phase one when we did the groundbreaking then, it was right in the midst of a recession. And it was, Third Federal was the only one that at that time was willing to take a risk in the middle of a recession to commit to the financing of new home construction and ownerships.
Back then, at the turn of that century, the community was growing and they needed basements because all these homes on Fleet Avenue didn't have basements. So my grandfather got all these men together and they would put the houses on stilts and dig the basements by hand and then drop the house right on the new basement. So literally, my family is responsible for the foundation of this neighborhood.
Having local banks like Third Federal is very important to us, and we're glad that Key and others are continuing to follow in those directions and make investments in our community. But the banking industry is critically important, and we had to help save the banks. At the same time, we're hoping that they continue to make appropriate investments in our neighborhoods.
And sure, there have been programs along the way to enhance some of the programs that were started by people from the neighborhoods. But the key to success, the key to longevity, the key to having neighborhoods come back and cities come back lies right in the hands of the people.
I have lived and worked in Slavic Village now for over 30 years, and I am blessed to be part of a community that is so resilient and that people who care and come together whenever there's an opportunity to celebrate, whenever there is an issue that people need to come together and express their concerns, people come together in this community.
Yeah, I can't be any more pleased. From the disaster to the Phoenix Rising, we're excited that we're starting this next phase. We've been selling our Neighbors Invest in Broadway homes, our Slavic Village recovery homes, and now this is really a testament that the market is starting to recover in a very positive way.
Do you think this kind of a disaster could happen again?
I think for it to happen again, the first one would have to end. I think we're still struggling through, what popped its head up in 2007 and 2008.
And we have a history of greed in financial institutions in this country. This is not the first crisis that has shaken the country to the core. I'm talking about Enron and Global Crossing and WorldCom. You can look back over history, and these things are fairly common occurrences. The problem with this one is that it was much more far-reaching in its scope.
There were huge problems with collateralized debt obligations, credit default swaps. There were trillions of dollars involved. Just look what happened to National City Bank. All of a sudden, they're PNC. Why? Because they were playing with derivatives, and they had no business playing with derivatives.
Well, it's the African proverb that when the elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. And that's what's going on. Nobody cares about Cleveland outside of Cleveland. I look at it sometimes as a colony. We're like a Roman province. You come here to make a bunch of money and leave.
Nobody can expect to get through life or get through business or get through situations without taking a turn in the meat grinder or take a hit or whatever. So it's just the way it is. What's fair? Who knows what's fair? Sometimes you make the green light and sometimes you get stopped. So was that fair? You got stopped by the red light? Maybe, maybe not. But it's just the way the game is. So when this thing got out of hand, it went way out of hand. And a lot of people were affected.
Well, we have the tools we need. It's called antitrust. We shouldn't have trillion-dollar banks because they really are too big to fail. You let them go under and it's just a huge problem. Somehow make them much, much smaller so that if one goes, two go, you don't care.
I have no problem with some of these incentivized down payment plans, but if you tell somebody they only have to come in with 3% as a down payment, I question whether that person's going to be able to take care of things that go wrong with a home, like a broken sewer line or the need for a new furnace or a hot water tank. If somebody is one missed paycheck away from missing a mortgage, you got a problem.
Without oversight, and I'm not talking about tremendous oversight, but proper oversight, and most importantly, proper education of the borrower. It's an unpopular stance, and what I'm about to say is going to make some people pissed. But ultimately, the borrowers, the homeowners that lost their homes had a whole lot to do with the housing crisis. Everybody should have seen what they were signing and had some sort of knowledge that their rates were going to go up, that unless their income increased dramatically in like 2 years, they're going to lose their home. And I think most people in the back of their mind knew that, not knowing that they're going to defraud a bank by not paying or fill out an illegal form. But I believe during that time, you had incentive to do that.
Who do you hold ultimately responsible then?
Me.
So you don't think anybody else was culpable besides yourself?
No, they were culpable in trying to resolve it. But I was the originator of the problem by doing just the series of events. I'll track back the decisions that I made back to trying to put together a turnaround company and working on it for 5 years, and then having the Twin Towers come down and not being able to raise enough money to keep us going anymore. So if I had just become stayed a stockbroker in 96 through the dot-com bust in 2001, 2002, that was the golden age of the stock. That was why I got in 20 years before, was for that run. And I left that to go buy a seat on the Titanic without knowing it was a seat on the Titanic. But if I had just minded my own business and stayed a stockbroker, none of that would have happened.
People forget. And one thing we need to do is not forget and learn from those experiences and just not let it happen again. Not get too greedy, not get too enamored with how fast we're growing or how much money we're making, but have a nice balance between making some money, giving back to the community, and making sure we're doing that on solid ground to begin with.
I would love to see, and maybe they're implementing it now, I don't know, but just a basic finance class, starting in middle school. Teach kids how a bank account works, simple stuff, but more importantly, how interest works. And not just paying it, but earning it. Because as we all know, we get older, that's what you rely on. And it seems like it's just, the knowledge is not out there.
Now, we can't avoid a financial crisis. It's just the nature of the beast. People are greedy, they're going to do things to excess, and it's just the way it works. What we could do is make sure that the right people suffer for it. In the old days, your investment bank, all the partners had all their money invested in the firm. So if the firm went down, they went down. That firms did go down, but at least those guys lost their shirts.
Jefferson likened the institution of slavery to holding a wolf by the ears, right? You don't like it much, but you don't dare let go. I think we have sort of a situation like that going with our financial system. There's a lot of things about it that we don't like too much and that we would like to fix, but there's so much invested in it that we don't dare let go of it.
We talk about, we paid down our debt, we have the balance sheets. It's not true. Consumer debt is at an all-time high, student debt is at an all-time high, corporate debt's at an all-time high, government debt's at an all-time high. You talk about you're pulling your sticks out. Which one? I don't know which one's going to collapse. It probably won't be housing this time. It'll be something else.
And what will happen?
It could be ugly because it's even a bigger problem this time. Now, when this is going to happen, I don't know. I could live long enough that it doesn't happen to me. But certainly my children may have a problem.
As far as Slavic Village goes, any small ray of hope or light would go such a long way. And I noticed that with my own personal experience, being down and out. Just a little perk. Somebody saying good morning, somebody not throwing tomatoes at me at the meeting. The little things go a long way.
Let me use a line that I've used before, that there's times when I had to walk this neighborhood with my eyes wide open. I had to be aware of everything. So that gave me eyesight. There are times now that I have to walk the neighborhood with my eyes closed. But that gives me vision. I see what it will be. I see what it can be. I see the improvement. I think we have come a long ways, both in our cultural understanding of each other, our diversity, equity, voice, giving more people a voice, our youth, giving them a voice, the different races, giving them a voice, the seniors, letting them have a voice and teaching them now to trust. Everybody is not against everybody. So I see us coming together, and I see what we can do when we come together. I don't have a problem shutting my eyes to that house right there. Because when I shut my eyes to that house right there, I see a family of 4. I see kids playing in the yard. I see a husband going to work. I see people cleaning windows and cutting grass. And I see kids going to school and I hear the laughter. That's the neighborhood that I see. And I'm proud to be a part of.